Good morning, everyone in the US. Good afternoon, everyone listening in Germany. My name is Lukas Streiff. I'll be moderating this session today from Beirut. So it's going to get a bit darker here in the background soon. The sun is setting on this side of the planet already. I'd like to welcome you very much. This is actually the fourth session of the Association of Former Members of Congress and Atlantik-Brücke in the Battleground election series. So the series looking at the dynamics in these battleground states that have been on all of our minds these last couple of days. And we will look today specifically at Michigan and Florida and Pennsylvania and Arizona. And we are very, very happy and honored, in fact, to have four former members of Congress here with us today. We have the Honorable Jim Blanchard from Michigan, Democrat, who served from 1975 to 83 and then became the governor of Michigan before he served as ambassador to Canada. We have Curbelo from Florida, Republican, who served from 2015 to 2019, the most recent of the four members we have with us today. And then we have Charlie Dent, the Republican from Pennsylvania from 2005 to 2018, and Karan English from Arizona, 1993 to 1995. We're going to do it like this today. We're going to have a brief intro by each of the speakers, basically just giving us your view on what is happening in your states particularly, and of course the country more widely. And then we'll have a brief discussion between the four of you, and I'll be moderating that before we then turn to the wider audience. We have the option to ask questions in the Q&A session that I will then present to the speakers for you. So just feel free and type that in there anytime from now on, and we'll get to that in the second session. We have around 45 minutes of everyone's time, which is great because we all know your phones are going crazy in the meantime, and the country's, and in fact more than the country's future hangs in the balance here. So very, very happy that the four of you took the time to speak with us today, and we'll kick it off from here. If I can maybe ask you, as you each briefly summarize your thoughts this morning for us, to basically, let's say, focus on the elections per se, the counting that is going on, that is of course very problematic at the moment in the perception of at least many in the country. And thirdly, the state of the country as you see it, what is happening to the US that we at Atlantik-Brücke should be trying to wrap our heads around. Maybe we start in the order of how the states came in a way, Florida being the first to have been called, which seems like a century ago now, doesn't it? Carlos Curbelo, may I start with you?
Sure. Good morning and greetings to everyone all over the world, I guess. And many thanks to anyone who had a hand in inviting me to be a part of this. It's an important time to gather and to have these discussions. I'm proud to report that although it hasn't always been the case, in this election, Florida was a model for counting and reporting results. Of course, 20 years ago, Florida became infamous for the hanging chads and the counting and recounting of votes, which was ultimately halted by the Supreme Court, but not this year. Our state, for many years, has allowed its residents to vote by mail. Those ballots are processed pretty much as they come in by elections departments. And that's why we were able to deliver a result, which, by the way, was a very good and surprisingly strong result for President Trump. Much of his growth here in Florida is attributable to higher support among minority groups, which is something that must be studied and understood in the coming years. For a long time in our state, and I think more broadly in the country, it was Democrats making gains with minority voters and Republicans making gains with white voters. Those trends were somewhat inverted here in this state. Just read a report this morning from the Miami Herald that one of the most African-American cities in South Florida doubled its support for Trump from 2016 to 2020. So there's certainly a lot to unpack there, and that's something that will be studied in the months ahead. In terms of the state of the country, precarious. Never in my lifetime have I been worried about our institutions, our basic freedoms as citizens as I am today. My family came from Cuba. They fled a country where institutions crumbled, where the rule of law ceased to exist, and where authoritarianism essentially took hold. Elections became irrelevant. And we're seeing that those sacred institutions for our country, they've always been sacred, are being undermined and diminished. And it's a high time for leaders, especially elected leaders, especially Republican elected leaders in this country, to stand up and to make sure that every vote gets counted, and that only after the result is clear do we declare a winner, recognize a winner in this country.
Thank you so much. And you've raised a bunch of points that I think the viewers will get back to you with questions on. But let's first make the rounds. So Representative Blanchard, may we go on with you? Tell us about Michigan and your thoughts this morning.
Well, thank you, Lukas. And again, I have worked with Atlantik-Brücke for many, many years and attended 2 conferences in Berlin and hosted one of them as governor. So I'm glad to be back talking with all of you and listening to you. I mentioned earlier, Carlos really touched on it. I have never worried as much about our country, the United States, in my life, and I'm 78, than I have the last few days and really the last few years. Never. And I've lived through Watergate, the Vietnam, all those issues that were very difficult and very traumatizing. But this one, I really worry about the future of our country. And my worries are not over because there's Trumpism out there without Trump. But I'm delighted to say that Joe Biden carried Michigan, which had gone to Mr. Trump 4 years ago. I'm delighted to say that all the suburban voters went overwhelmingly for Joe Biden, and the city voters and minorities did as well on those areas, and university areas went for Joe Biden. So I'm really happy. We reclaimed Michigan for the Democrats and for Joe Biden, probably by about 3 points. The polls actually said it would be 5 or 6 or 7. So what happened there? Well, in the rural areas of small towns, Trump so energized those voters that he ran a lot closer than I think the pollsters or people expected. But I'm thrilled. I've known Joe Biden for 46 years, and I think he'll do a wonderful job. I think he's going to work with our allies. He's going to reach out and work with Germany and the European Union and the United Kingdom and Japan and Korea. We're going to have, I think, a cooperative, enlightened foreign policy. We'll rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. Joe has got a big challenge because the House of Representatives is more narrowly Democratic and there'll be a Republican Senate. I think he's up to the job. I feel really happy, like he's going to be declared the winner probably today. I'm really, really happy about it. And I'm even happier for our country. And I frankly think I'm happy for our friends in the world. Really happy and proud my state came through, and I spent most of my time since February working on it. And I'm also going to hear from Charlie Dent. You're going to hear from Charlie Dent. And I'm so glad he kept predicting Pennsylvania would go for Joe Biden.
Thank you, Congressman Blanchard. And in fact, yes, you have been one of the longest running friends of the Atlantik-Brücke and at the former Members of Congress Association. So thank you for your longstanding support and being with us today again. Now, before we turn to the last 2 states, which are both not called yet, I actually suggest we go with Arizona first, because it might very well be that we are together here in this session while Pennsylvania comes through with some pretty significant numbers. So actually, before I turn to Arizona, let's just ask the Honorable Dent, please, just your prediction. Will it go Democrat or not?
Pennsylvania? Yes, it will.
Okay, we'll get back to you. We'll get back to you in a little bit. But Congresswoman English, may you now take the floor and tell us about Arizona, please.
Certainly. I had a technical problem here, Art. Can you still see and hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, because I can't see you. But anyway, one of the reasons Arizona is turning blue is there is a growing number of minorities, Hispanics, Native Americans, African Americans, and a lot of people coming from other states, California being one of them. The voters are very tired of political unrest, and they are looking for candidates with a voice of reason, and that is one of the reasons the Senate race, I think, was won by, or it is projected to win by a Democrat. The Republican running in that race was pretty much close to Trump, and people were tired of hearing the unrest and the accusations coming from that candidate. So I think Arizona's approach was to help take the Senate, and of course getting out the votes. The issues that were most important in Arizona were immigration, the coronavirus pandemic, education and economic development. And I mean education and economic development for all walks of life, not just the top 1%, which has shown a lot of wealth in Arizona recently, but to spread that wealth out. And there's just been a big concern. I agree with some of the other comments, but one of the big concerns has been the administration's withdrawal from a number of worldwide organizations and the isolationism that we seem to be going in that direction. We are very much hoping that Vice President Biden can turn this around and we can rejoin the rest of the world.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. I now turn to Congressman Charlie Dent, and also start by thanking you. You've also been a great supporter of Atlantik-Brücke and actually spoke to us, I think, just a while back ago on the 4th, it was, in fact, right? So thank you for that. And also thank you for taking the time this morning, because we saw you on CNN just so a couple of hours ago, actually, 2:30 a.m. your time, I think it was.
Exactly.
So how much you're getting. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Guten Tag, Atlantik-Brücke. Ich heiße Charlie Dent. Ich bin Pennsylvania Deutsch. There you go. So I just said good morning, Atlantik-Brücke. I'm Charlie Dent, and I'm Pennsylvania German. There you have it. At least my mother is, my mother's side. Just a few things about Pennsylvania. Well, I am not surprised by what's happening. In fact, as we speak, I think some news outlets are currently reporting. I'm associated with CNN. We have not yet, I think, reported it, but some are starting to report that I think that Joe Biden has just pulled ahead of Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. I don't have that officially, but I'm not looking to television, but I think it's happening literally as we speak. So I wanted to just say that. I am not surprised by this outcome. And I just wanted to say something too. What I think is happening in the election is this, that there are a lot of, it seems to me that there's a story here about what we call the swing voter. And I'm going to talk about some swing voting Republicans and independents. And I got the sense that they either did not vote for Donald Trump or voted for Joe Biden, and then went down ballot and voted for Republicans for Congress.
Yes.
And I think that is what's happening. That is a story that has not yet been told. That's happening in Pennsylvania and across the country. And I think that's what's happening. By the way, this whole election process right now, I feel like there's a series of tornadoes touching down. They first hit Florida. Well, dust cleared, and Donald Trump won Florida. It touched down in Michigan, and dust is cleared, and Michigan has gone for Biden. And that tornado right now is in Arizona and Pennsylvania. And we're still trying to sort things out. But that's my sense. The other thing I wanted to point out too, that I think voters are actually very smart. That they haven't given either side so far a policy mandate. Neither Joe Biden nor the Republicans. But what I think they've done is given Joe Biden a governing mandate. And I think that mandate is this, that they want Joe Biden to steady the ship of state. and stabilize our situation after all of this trauma and chaos of the Trump years. So I think that's what they're after. And so that means what some of my colleagues have discussed, maybe, reasserting our support for NATO and the European Union, rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, essentially just trying to stabilize relationships. And I think if Republicans are smart, they will join Biden in that endeavor, just to stabilize the ship of state. So, but right now, and just so our European viewers understand what's happening in Pennsylvania, the reason why the vote is taking so long, and this is probably confusing to you, Pennsylvania never allowed mail-in voting on this scale before. The only way you could ever vote by mail, or absentee, as we like to say, is if you were out of the county of your residence on that day, or you were physically unable to go to the polls, you're unwell, or you're an invalid. That's basically the only reason. So, but in October, before the pandemic, the Pennsylvania General Assembly and the governor changed the law to allow absentee balloting for any reason. Okay, the pandemic hits, and now the volumes are incredible, and Pennsylvania has no experience doing mail-in voting, and so this is our trial run. And of course, Pennsylvania, to make things more difficult, said that we could not begin counting the mail-in ballots until Election Day. And so that's why it's taking so long. And I live in one of the counties they were talking about last night on CNN, Lehigh County, the Allentown area. My votes, my family's, we voted by mail, absentee, were recorded probably yesterday. And so that's what's happening. And that's why it's taking so long. And we anticipated that the in-person vote would go heavily for Donald Trump, which it did. And the mail-in vote will go heavily for Joe Biden, which it has. And I should also point out, because everybody's looking at Philadelphia right now, and I should just say something about the city of brotherly love, the birthplace of American democracy. I'm about 59 miles from there right now, and I'll be down there later today. But I'll tell you what's happening in Philadelphia. And I frankly, I knew on Wednesday morning that Biden was going to win Pennsylvania, because I saw the mail-in ballots coming in from Philadelphia, and my sources inside Philly, in Philadelphia, were telling me that Joe Biden was winning the mail-in vote 95-5. I mean, that's, and they've been winning, actually, he's been winning about a 3-to-1 basis, 75-25. But in Philadelphia, it's very heavily Democrat. And of course, it's the largest county in Pennsylvania, the largest city. And that has reported that way. So that's kind of what's happening. That's why it's taking so long. That's why you're seeing this, what some people call the red mirage and blue shift. That you would see Trump doing well on Election Day, only to see this thing, that's the red, see this thing shift over the coming days to the blue, to Joe Biden. And that's essentially what's happened in Pennsylvania. And it happened in Michigan and some other states, Wisconsin. And so that's what's going on.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I think we've been tracking this issue for a while. All of us here, all the viewers are interested in the US election as if we were American almost, I'd say. So I think this issue is clear to us. But I think one issue that is not as clear in Germany, at least, looking at the US, one thing that I just see a lot of head scratching about is the vote in Florida. And let's say let's drill in on the question of which groups came out. And I think there's a lot of questions in Germany trying to wrap our heads around the Latino vote and also the African-American vote, not just in Florida, but in different states around the country, which did go with some surprising shares to the president. So maybe we can start in Florida, but all feel free to weigh in on these points. We want to make it a conversation between the four of you on what you see surprising maybe about the turnout of different groups of voters.
I have a question for Carlos on Florida as well.
Go right ahead.
Carlos, when I heard that Trump was running extremely well among Americans of Cuban heritage, which they've been Republican, as you know, I thought immediately that the Biden campaign should point out that Cuba was sustained by the Soviets, led in part by a man named Putin. And why would we let someone in South Florida think that Joe wouldn't be much better when Trump has been a sycophant to Putin, who was one of the heads of the Soviet intelligence, which financially kept Castro in power. And the idea that somehow Biden would bring forth socialism was absurd. Wasn't there a better way to handle that, Carlos?
Yeah, a few thoughts on that, and I think there are multiple factors that influence the result. Number one, the Trump campaign and Republicans have been persistent and on message about tying the Biden-Harris ticket to the more radical elements in the Democratic Party, those who do identify as socialists, and they are prominent. Bernie Sanders, AOC, they're out there, and it's very easy to make those connections, and a lot of voters believe that, even though Joe Biden has a long record of being a consensus builder and certainly not a socialist. The other factor is that the Biden campaign was just really slow, and I would say even lazy, about defending itself from these attacks. They didn't really have a strong presence in the state of Florida until late, and then they outsourced it to the Bloomberg organization. Bloomberg pumped a ton of money in here to try to defend Biden, but it was way too late. And then the last thing, and I think this is important really for both parties to understand, I think more so Democrats, for a long time, Democrats have had the same tired message directed at the Hispanic community. They treat the Latino community as if it's monolithic, as if every Latino family only cares about immigration, which without question is an important issue, but for a lot of Latino families, especially those who have been here for a couple generations, it isn't front and center. And then, a lot of the messaging that Democrats have tended to use as they campaign toward minority groups, focusing on healthcare. This year, the pandemic, a lot of doom and gloom about what Republicans are going to take away. President Trump, whether it was sincere or not, offered these communities a message of economic hope, that they would be able to continue prospering, that Hispanic and Black unemployment was at all-time lows before the pandemic. I think this was effective, and I think Democrats have to learn from that they can't use the same strategy for every single Hispanic community, because there are differences. And Jim, it wasn't only Cuban Americans who gravitated more towards President Trump, other groups as well. There's evidence that in Central Florida, Trump got about 30% of the Puerto Rican vote. It would be tough to understand because, of course, he mismanaged Hurricane Maria. He said some offensive things. When he went to the island, his conduct was, in some ways objectionable. But again, this message that he kept drilling in about unemployment, about economic prosperity. I mean, think about it. A lot of immigrant families, that's why they come to the United States. They want to prosper economically. They're not coming here thinking about immigration policy or healthcare policy, and again, all those issues are important. I'm not dismissing them, but I think there are big lessons to be learned here, especially by Democrats.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, let's continue on this point of getting out the vote of different parts of the voting population. How about Michigan and Pennsylvania? I mean, one aspect that we've seen is that the president did hold his voters from last time around in a way. If you look at the absolute numbers, he did carry large segments of the voting population in your states. So it's not that he had lost the confidence of his voters, let's say, but the Democrats did bring out even more. So what's your take on the mobilization of different voting groups and what might have surprised you in the results so far? Representative Blanchard, Representative Dent, as you wish, take the floor, please.
Well, first, I want to say I agree with Charlie about the Republican voters, because we had a primary on March 10th to help select who would the Democratic nominee be. And it came down to Joe Biden versus Bernie Sanders. And there were a huge number of Republicans voted in the Democratic primary for Joe Biden because they didn't want a far left of center Democratic candidate on the ballot in the fall. They wanted to be able to vote against Trump. So we did extremely well in all the affluent suburbs, which have a lot of Republicans, particularly Republican women, who voted for Joe Biden both in March and in the fall. But they went back and then voted for Republicans for the Senate and Congress and local offices, because that's exactly what happened. So I think Joe has a lot of tentative support among moderate Republicans. And so, and he's the best candidate we had to win. And balancing this in Congress, the others can talk about that, is going to be really important. However, even though we won in Michigan, in the small towns and rural towns, they love Donald Trump. And I can try to psychoanalyze all that, but they feel he speaks for them, even though he has nothing in common with them. They will follow him off a cliff. I think he treats them like a bunch of dummies when he says I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and they would still support me. He tells them, in my opinion, one lie after another, and they cheer. They go to all these rallies. He had like 4 rallies the last 3 days in Michigan and really energized his voters because they really feel that he speaks for them and that the Democratic Party and the establishment Republican Party has not paid enough attention. And some of it's nativism and some of it's racism, but a lot of it is just people feeling like the big shots don't seem to worry about them, and the media is against them as well, and they're looked down on. So this is an issue that the Democrats and really the moderate Republicans need to deal with as we move ahead. And Joe Biden needs to govern in a way that the people who voted for Trump, at least some of them, feel that he respects them. It's really going to be important.
I'll just jump in here, Governor, because Charlie made a point earlier, and I think that the mandate in this election is for those who seek compromise and consensus building. You look at the House. I mean, Nancy Pelosi's majority in the House is going to be very slim. I think it's going to be even more slim than what's being reported right now, because Republicans are going to flip at least 1 seat in California and maybe a couple others. This could be a 5-6 seat majority. And that means that both parties have to work together.
Yeah, this is a mandate for moderation because the people, a lot of the people voted for Joe
well
work with Republicans. And they don't want the left wing of the Democratic Party to have leverage. They want Joe to work with everybody, including the Republicans.
Yeah, hey, Lukas, I think you asked a question about turnout. Is that was the question? I think, and I want to just quickly say something. Regardless of one's feelings about President Trump, he is a turnout machine. He turns out his allies and he turns out his enemies, and he does. I mean, that's what. And I saw this, and I know Carlos because we served together, and he's a good friend. We saw this that in 2017, 18, and 19, after Donald Trump was elected, Democratic turnouts were sky high, and they had enormously successful elections in those 3 years, particularly in the suburban communities of the country. And Republicans couldn't keep pace with that. Now, of course, it's 2020, and Donald Trump himself is actually on the ballot, where his name is on the ballot. And of course, Republicans, as well as Democrats, turned out. So I'm kind of looking at this whole thing as in many respects, it is a rejection of Donald Trump. But then I keep coming back to this notion. There are people, a significant number of people in this country who were probably Republican or independent and voted either not for president at all, and they voted for Joe Biden. And then they went down ballot and voted for Republican candidates. Not one House Republican incumbent has lost re-election while Donald Trump is losing. Think about that. In Maine, we talked a lot about Senator Susan Collins, who's a very moderate member and very pragmatic. And Donald Trump is losing Maine by I think a significant margin. I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but they reelected Susan Collins. They said, hey, we don't like Trump, but hey, we like her. And they voted for her. I mean, so you see this is happening. So there was actually some very strategic ticket splitting amidst this very robust turnout. Now, I think, hard partisans on each side won't like this outcome, but I actually kind of like this outcome. And if I'm Joe Biden, I'm going to say, you know what? This really helps him because he's going to, if he had a Democratic Senate, he'd be facing enormous pressure to tack to the left, to placate the Bernie Sanders and AOC and Elizabeth Warren. Now he's got a great he's got a great foil. He can say, well, I can't do any of those things because of these Republicans. So this will push Joe Biden towards the center, which is where I think he wants to be anyway. And so I think this is actually a pretty good outcome.
I'm glad actually that we've been spending these last 20, 30 minutes even on actual substance and politics and not on the counting and the big kind of ripping apart, let's say, of the political and social fabric that is going on at the moment. But we do need to turn to it and look at the road ahead. Congresswoman English, you've already told us what brought out the vote in Arizona. So maybe we'll start with you on this point. What are the next, let's say, road marks that you're looking for as this continues, and what is your take about the legal litigation issues that are upcoming, but of course also the political aspects of the litigation battles ahead and how they will play out in the U.S.?
Well, in Maricopa County, where the largest number of votes still to be counted exist, there has been some protests with people carrying guns, and that's intimidating. And so there is some concern about that. However, the counting has been incredibly transparent. You can watch it online. There's people can be within 6 feet of the counters. So the process has been very transparent. But there are still probably going to be some lawsuits. And I think that they will be frivolous, but I think there will be some things that will try to slow the process down. One of the things that was said earlier that I just want to add to is one of the things that brought out a lot of voters, Republican voters, for Trump was the fact that he shook things up. And they don't believe that Biden will continue to shake things up. So I argue with even family members about what does that really mean for the future, and they don't know. But in fact, that is the reason they voted for Trump. I think Arizona will go for Biden. I think it will be a very slim margin. I do think that the votes will take a little bit longer. For instance, in Coconino County, there is a Native American tribe on the Colorado River, and the only way they get the votes out of that precinct is by helicoptering the tally out. So Arizona is a large state. It has a very unique voting area, and so it does take a little bit longer in Arizona to gather all of those votes. That being said, I think that there still is, I think there's still a trend towards Biden, and I think the hope is that he will shake things up, whatever that means.
Representative Dent is bringing in his dog on opinions of crucial importance.
The dog agrees.
Yeah. I'd like to bring in a question of one of our audience members on this one. This is from Magnus Graf Lambsdorff. He writes, why should we be concerned about the state of the US democratic system? Observing the tiresome but very disciplined counting of the ballots, I'm rather impressed by the functioning of the institutions. Also, all major news networks provide transparency down to the individual vote. So that's great. What's to worry about?
Well, let me say, from the point of view of Michigan, we adopted universal vote by mail 2 years ago. And the people decided that. And so our late count was simply that we had 3.1 million people vote by mail. And they supported Joe Biden dramatically over the people who voted in person. I'll tell you why I'm the oldest person on this panel. I was born in 1942. By the way, I've admired the recovery and emergence of modern Germany. It's a great success story in our planet, and it's been a wonderful thing for America and Europe. But what bothers me is this: we've always been, smug, proud, our great institutions and our great democracy. in our help, in our willingness to help work with our allies, help lead the world, not lead the world, help set the post-war agenda, whether the Marshall Plan, the Truman Doctrine, NATO, the emergence of trade relationships. And we never thought we could have a tyrant like Donald Trump in power, and they would fire up rallies everywhere, shouting things like, lock her up, fire Tony Fauci, fire Tony Fauci. We thought we were immune from that. And I always thought the Republican Party was immune from that. He is not a Republican, by the way, in my opinion, but there are people in that party and people who used to be in my who think that a guy should rule as a authoritarian leader and disregard our systems, our rule of law, try to accuse our intelligence agencies of spying on him, siding with tyrants like Putin, Kim Jong-un, Erdogan in Turkey, and Duarte in the Philippines. I never thought I thought our system was strong enough that could never happen. That someone that conducts himself like Trump couldn't get elected in the United States. Well, he did. We are not so, as I thought, exceptional that we aren't vulnerable to Trumpism and authoritarianism. That's why we should worry, and that's why we need to make sure Joe Biden governs in the way that everyone can feel proud of our system and proud of our global engagement.
Yeah.
Proud of the rule of law.
I'm sure you. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's why I worry. But Joe has a great challenge, and we're all going to have to help him.
Yeah, on this point, I don't think it'll surprise any of you that us in Germany, of course, watching tweets like Donald Jr. Calling for a total war on the counting sends shivers down our spines. Of course, it does bring up very, very terrible associations. But let me turn to the other members of the panel. What are your thoughts about what is worrying about what is going on and what might not be worrying after all?
Well, that's exactly why people should be worried, because the president may not want to leave office. And what's going to happen eventually is probably Mitch McConnell, who is the second highest ranking Republican right now, certainly the second most prominent, is going to have to go into the Oval Office and explain to the president that it's very likely that he lost this election, and that in this country, when people lose elections, they leave office. It happened to me. It's happened to many other people. And you just move on. And if you want to try again, you can. And I mean, as terrifying as the thought is, Donald Trump can try again in 4 years if he wanted to. He's not prohibited from doing so, but he's going to have to leave on the 20th of January. And I think he's really struggling with that. We saw that yesterday in his remarks, and certainly his family is struggling with that and is trying to get other Republicans to undermine this counting of legally cast votes. So that's why we're worried. And we don't want to worry our friends abroad, but we're not going to lie to them either. Our democracy is in a precarious state. The next few days and weeks will be critical.
Yeah. I think our system is going to come through just fine. I'm call me an optimist or Pollyannish, but in this country, and as is the case in Germany, the candidates for office don't get to determine whether or not they won. And we have our counties and our states that, conduct the elections, and they are the ones who determine who wins and who loses. They certify the vote, not the candidates. And that's the way it should be. So, Donald Trump Jr. can make a lot of noise, yell and scream, pound his shoe on the table. But he's not counting the votes, and he's not going to determine who wins this damn race. That's not how it works in this country. And he's going to find that out fast. And if his father, it's determined that, that all the certifications come in and it's determined that Joe Biden won the Electoral College with 270 plus votes, well, then, if the president doesn't leave, I think what will happen is some institutional force. And in the U.S. House, Carlos knows, he's a good friend. I was so sad when he lost. But if you're a member of Congress and you lose your election, somebody from the chief clerk of the House comes to you and says, you know what, you need to vacate your office by about December 7th. And even though you're still a member of Congress, you need to get out because we're preparing it for the next guy. and you have to leave. And they put you down in the bullpen in the basement of the Longworth building or someplace and keep you out of the way, and they let you hang out until, your term is done. Now, at the presidential level, I suspect once this is certified, the Secret Service will determine, they say, okay, we have a new president. We have sworn our oath to the new commander in chief. The detail will support him, and they'll go to President Trump and say, thank you for your service. We're taking you home. We'll send your stuff later. I could say, that's, I think how it works.
I agree that I think we will mend after January. However, there is a growing concern in Arizona about what happens between now and then. The president has been able to foment a lot of unrest in Arizona. On my street, people go by and honk their horns if you have a Biden sign in your yard. But not only is there the civil unrest, but there is a concern that the president will do a lot of damage through various other areas like the environment, education, even the pandemic, because he is angry and upset. And so we're really concerned about what will happen between now and January 20th, both on the administrative and civil unrest areas.
As you should be. He may fire Christopher Wray at the FBI. I can see him firing people, but
yeah.
At the end of the day, if he fires Christopher Wray, that's stunning to me that he might fire Christopher Wray, the FBI director. If I were Biden, I'd just say, we're going to keep you. Or, there are people like that he might want to keep around, Joe Biden.
Yeah. I think there's fewer people that have a worry about him actually not leaving office, but the question is unrest. And we have a question from the audience here. Donatella Ceccarelli is asking whether we need to fear actual violence on the street after the press conference he gave, or the speech he gave in the White House yesterday, and the tweet since.
Boy, I hate to say so, but I think there might be some.
I say no in Michigan. We'll be fine, even though we actually had some gun-toting people in our capital back in April. No, I think the public will accept the election. I'm an optimist in that sense with Charlie Dent. This is a victory for liberal democracy and the rule of law. And we had the highest turnout, at least in Michigan, I think in our country, that we've ever had. So that part's a good thing. And I think Joe will do a good job governing. I agree with what Charlie said. And I think Carlos and Karan about with moderation, with some bipartisan help. But we still have the Trumpism out there. The fact that so many people could feel so strongly to follow a guy who is unable to tell the truth, who belittles people who are different. We still have to deal with that and carefully and thoughtfully. But I'm so happy that Joe will be in the White House. I can't tell you how happy I am. It's so important for everyone I know, and I think for the future of our world.
Well, hey, Lukas, you mentioned last night, you mentioned the president's speech last night. I watched that and I was absolutely mortified. I thought that was a reprehensible statement. It was just so out of bounds, because what he basically said was that these votes that were cast within the laws of their state, like in my state, I voted by mail, as did my family. My vote was not counted until Wednesday or Thursday. I think it was counted actually yesterday. I know that was happening in my county. I knew when they were counting the mail-in votes. And he was saying that these votes, because they were being counted after Election Day, were somehow fraudulent. That to me is just an assault on the franchise. Why is the president trying to disenfranchise me and my family and millions of Americans? And you should notice too that I don't know that if there was any Republican in the country who stood up and said, "Oh boy, that was a terrific statement." I think if anything, you heard people, they were mortified, Republicans, and this is the kind of thing that is chilling. But fortunately, we're not going to have to hear too many more of those types of speeches from the White House, because I think because I do think there will be a transition. He'll help out, and he won't be gracious. He's not going to be like George H.W. Bush, who was a very gracious man when he turn the reins over to Bill Clinton. This is going to be, it'll be probably fairly ugly, but we'll get through it, and then we'll turn the page.
we're going to have to actually turn the page on our session here. We want to respect all of your times and not run over. But I'd like to actually finish with one question to you each, maybe with the hopes for a brief answer. If you think ahead, maybe let's say 10, 20 years, how do you think this election is going to be looked at? How will it go into US history in the long run?
It will be the most election that we had in 100 years or more, probably more. Maybe the most important election since 1865, 1864.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it'll be looked at as trying to change a path in history that we went down, and the majority did not agree with it. And I think that it will be looked at as it is possible to change the direction in this country with a lot of effort. And I hope we take credit for that.
Yeah, like the election in 1865, I hope this one will be defined by what happens after it. And certainly there's a great opportunity to heal and to improve the state of our union beginning in January of next year.
You know, this to me, this election is kind of like America's Eva Peron moment. You know, we've gone through this populist this populist uprising, and now we're moving on. But we should also keep some perspective that Donald Trump was not the cause of all of these problems. He was a consequence. That there were issues, whether I'm a transatlanticist and I believe strongly in it, but we also have to acknowledge there were challenges in the transatlantic relationship, for example, prior to Donald Trump. And so we have to, get to a better place. We can't go back to where we were. I think we all agree. But we can get to a better place, certainly than where we are now, and develop some new reconstructed relationships and understanding. So I'm still guardedly optimistic.
Yeah, that's actually hopeful remarks that you're all leaving us with. Thank you so much for those. Let's hope very much that we're not just a transatlantic bubble that misses the boat on where the general opinion is in very different parts of the country. Let's hope that all of your predictions will come true. It's certainly been hopeful for us to hear them. Thank you for taking the time this morning. I know you've got a lot on all of you. Thanks so much for taking the time, and thank you for the members of Atlantik-Brücke to dial in from across the world. All the best to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.